Let's dive into the discussions shaping the nation.
I want to start by commending Deputy Coppinger and her colleagues for using their private members' time to put forward this extremely important motion. As Deputy Coppinger has indicated, the Government will not be opposing this motion. I want to assure her, however, that is not the case of the Government saying leave it in our hands. I'm fully aware that on this issue that Government will not have all the answers. There are many proposals that have been put forward by Deputy Coppinger and her colleagues with which the Government agrees. Some proposals are more challenging, and I'll outline them presently. But this is such a significant and widespread problem, Cathaoirleach, that it is certainly the case that Government on its own won't be able to resolve this issue. The issue of violence against women, and that's predominantly what we're talking about, is of such a pervasive nature that I think we really need a response, not just from the political system, but we need it also from society as a whole. I think one of my functions as Minister for Justice is to try not just to change the law and to change the policy, but also try to give effect to societal changes in attitudes. Predominantly, women are the victims of this violence, and consequently, predominantly, men are the perpetrators of this violence. I think it's incumbent upon me as a man, male Minister for Justice, to try to speak as well to those men who think it is acceptable to perpetrate violence against women. We must repeatedly emphasise it is not acceptable. I agree to a certain extent with what Deputy Coppinger said in terms of what is the origins or the provenance of this violence. A lot of it, like a lot of violence, is about control, trying to control individuals, and for too long some men believe that they are entitled to try to control women. That societal attitude needs to change. I also know that Deputy Coppinger and her colleagues have been working with many survivors and victims of domestic and gender-based violence in order that their voices are heard. I want to welcome those victims and families of victims to the gallery here today. I want to commend them and admire them for their bravery in coming forward, Cathaoirleach, and speaking out as they've done. And I think it's also important to point out that the voice of survivors are particularly loudly heard when they go through the court process and it results in a conviction against the perpetrator of the appalling violence against them. I note what Deputy Coppinger has stated about the challenges posed by the court system. But I have to say that the voices of those who do go through the system, and I know it's very challenging and we need to make it easier, but the voices of those who do go through the court system and who obtain a conviction at the end of it are very loud and very influential. These women remind us that although we've made improvements, reformed our laws and strengthened support structures, we still have much to do in moving along this journey to seek justice. As I said, we won't be opposing this private member's motion. We're not yet where we want to be and where we need to be in a society where zero tolerance in respect of domestic, sexual and gender-based violence is our objective. The statistics in this area are frightening, Cathaoirleach. I think it was Deputy Healy who referred to the CSO statistics in their survey of sexual violence that was published in 2022. It is simply unacceptable that more than half of the women in this country have experienced sexual violence in childhood or adulthood. I'm pleased to say the CSO is now also doing a survey in respect of, and they're doing this along with Kuhn, in respect of domestic violence survey. That's something that we need further information on as well. We can't really adequately respond to this problem or to any problem unless we have the necessary data in respect of it. And I regret to say I have no doubt that the figures will reflect the reality that far too many people are living with domestic violence in this country. But to deal with it, we need to know the data in respect of it. And I just want to turn to the private member's motion, and I'd just like to outline what the Government has done and some issues in respect of what's been raised. Deputy Coppinger very much focused on the issue of disclosure of counselling notes. I remember I was a member of Dáil Éireann back in 2017, as was Deputy Coppinger, when we dealt with the Criminal Justice Sexual Offences Bill, which was going through the House then. And Section 33 of that bill was the inclusion of the new Section 19A. And all of us thought at that time that this was a provision that was going to deal with that issue. And if you read Section 19A, as I did earlier today, on paper, it looks like it covers all the important issues. It says that disclosure notes shall not be, or counselling notes shall not be disclosed unless it's necessary for a fair trial. But unfortunately, the application of Section 19A is not operating the way that the Oireachtas intended. And I think it's a point that was made by Professor Tom O'Malley in his review of the legislation in this area, where he said people aren't aware of it. But I'm certainly committed to reviewing it, to looking at it, and if it is the case that we need to have legislation to amend it, I'll do that and I'll bring forward the legislation. Deputy Coppinger also mentioned Valerie's Law. I've already instructed my department that I want legislation to be brought through amending the Guardianship of Infants Act in order that we can have a situation where we can, or a court can, remove guardianship rights from parents or guardians who kill or seriously harm another parent or guardian of their child. I hope to have a memorandum to government, going to government next month, Deputy, dealing with getting permission from government to proceed with drafting that, and the heads of bill are being prepared in my department as well. In terms of the domestic violence register, that's something that I'm committing to establish. What I think is important is that if somebody is convicted of a serious criminal offence before the courts, the public should be aware of that. We have a situation in this country where we publish lists of tax offenders. We don't publish a list of people who have been convicted of rape or serious sexual assault. The only way we know about that is if a journalist happens to be in court, or if, as many brave victims have done, the victim decides subsequently to go public in respect of it. I think it's unfair to expect every victim to carry that burden and decide, I'm going to waive my anonymity because I want to disclose the identity of the individual here. I think that's too much for them, and I think we need to have a system in place where there is disclosure of information of people who have been convicted of serious offences. And I'm talking about in respect of convictions only there. The government also recognises the need to build on the legislative and structural reforms already underway to further enhance support for victims of gender-based violence. We've seen sentences increased. We've seen the Criminal Law Sexual Offences and Human Trafficking Act 2024 signed into law last year, which expands a victim's right to legal representation in circumstances. Also, Deputy Coppinger referred to the character reference issue. At present, as the law is, that if you're going to give a character reference, it has to be on oath or an affidavit, and you can be subject to cross-examination. In terms of the woman you mentioned, Sarah, she should be told who was put in as character reference in respect of the person who had been convicted of the offence against her. Character references only arise in terms of the imposition of a sentence. I'll consider it, but I suppose we need to be aware of, are we going to do away with character references across the board and for all offences? Because I think it would be difficult to say we're just going to get rid of character references in respect of persons who are convicted of certain offences, but for other serious offences we would permit them. So it's an area that I think we need to reflect on. But I want you to know as well that there's a lot of reform going on in the family justice area. A central element of this is the establishment of dedicated family courts with specialist judges assigned on a full-time basis. I think it's important that our family law system operates much more effectively. Regrettably, a lot of the violence that we see perpetrated against women is violence that comes from persons with whom they're in a relationship within the family. So the court service is progressing an ambitious 10-year modernisation programme to deliver an operating model that's digitally enabled and designed around the user, and that is something I think that will improve it. You also mentioned, Deputy, the issue about making complaints against the judiciary. Complaints can be made against the judiciary within the Judicial Council framework. There's also a constitutional mechanism and legislation in place for the severe purpose of trying to remove a judge from office. Obviously, we have to be careful that we protect the independence of the judiciary. The last thing we want is for decisions of judges to be subject to review by this House or people that this House decides to appoint to some statutory body. We went through a difficult circumstance in terms of establishing the Judicial Council so that it would retain its independence, and it can examine the conduct of judge in cases where judicial misconduct is alleged. You've also called in your motion for education programmes to challenge misogyny and gender-based violence. There's a substantial body of work already underway with CUN at the core of its efforts. And can I just say, educational and awareness-raising campaigns have covered the issues of sexual consent, domestic abuse and intimate image abuse. And building on the momentum of those campaigns, CUN is launching a campaign called Hardest Stories, and it's actually been launched today. at 11 a.m. And Deputy Coppinger, I hope you'll forgive me, but I'm going to go down and launch that campaign by Cuan this morning. The launch is at 11 o'clock, so regrettably I'll have to leave here at 20 to 11. But Minister of State Collins will be here for the rest of the debate. I know, but I think it is appropriate that I do go down and launch. I think it is appropriate that I do go down and launch that Heart the Stories campaign by Cuan. And it's also working in partnership with the Department of Education. So I want to thank you for the motion. The government isn't opposing it. This is an issue, as Ken Corlett, that requires full attention from government. But as I can just repeat again, government won't have all the answers. There's a requirement, and I will listen to all suggestions that come from this House. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Minister.
Like, share, and subscribe, and let us know your thoughts in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.